And so, good day, everyone. My name is Jacqueline O'Flanagan. I lead our financial services business for the Americas, and I'm based in New York. And so, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I would say over the course of the last couple of years, we've seen dramatic change and shift across our business. And so, what I'm hoping to do today is really ground ourselves in industry purpose grounded by impact, talking a little bit about the change and transformation that we're seeing. Why now for AI? I'll dabble into some of the larger use cases and paradigm shifts that we're seeing across the industry, talk a little bit about the regulatory implications and what we're seeing from an operational resilience perspective across the ecosystem, and then dive into what we're seeing in the market as the evolution of the frontier firm and the way organizations are really starting to think about embracing and adopting AI, what this means for some of the workloads, and then jump into some of the critical components. For anybody who has questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I know Jeffrey and team have shared. We'll do our best to respond as we can to those questions, but don't hesitate. And if there's something we can't get to today, we'll definitely make sure that we follow up. And so as I jump in, I want to just kind of ground ourselves in where we are today. And for many of us on the call, when we look back over the course of the last 24 months, uncertainty has never felt so certain. And I say this through the lens of in our daily lives, in our professional lives, from a geopolitical standpoint, we have war on multiple continents. We have geopolitical impacts, really resonating at the heart of our day-to-day activities. And so when we think about the evolution and the shift of what we are living through and experiencing, not just as employees and as organizations, but as humans, I know that the weight and the gravity of what we are feeling has been immense for quite some time. And what we're hoping to do today is really shine a little bit of clarity onto how AI and the agentic workflow can help you think about not only your existing business today, but the future of your business as well. And so I want to ground ourselves as we embark on this journey today, and why this really matters for us is Microsoft's mission is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And I know that for many that seems like an extremely lofty mission, but what this means to us and how we take this personally is we believe that AI also powers human achievement. And so when we think about the opportunity that we have ahead of us, this is really not just to kind of underpin and underscore how we can use technology to realign process and increase productivity or efficiency within our day. This is for us to look across all ecosystems and all organizations to figure out how we can transform the world together. And what that means in a lot of ways, and for many people who are just starting to dabble in AI, when you look at the opportunity to have natural language model and interact with natural language models almost instantaneously, translation on the fly, being able to cobble together multiple lines of research to disseminate information much quicker and have that intelligence and tap at your fingertip. This changes the way that the world is working and the way it's thinking. And we do believe that as humans and citizens of this planet, we have an immense opportunity to not only safeguard the planet, but to safeguard our people. And so what we're going to do today is dive a little bit into the paradigm shifts that we're seeing within the financial services industry specifically. And so as we kind of ground ourselves, this is some of the major challenges that we're seeing. And when we think about the opportunity for Microsoft to participate in this, we're working hand in hand with a lot of our clients to reimagine, banking, capital markets, and insurance powered by purpose and grounded by impact. And when I think about some of these large paradigm shifts, we're sitting at the large precipice of change. We have the largest generational wealth transfer that is about to happen in our time. And so what does that mean for many of us? Of that 83 trillion in assets, 65 trillion of that will be in the US over the course of the next decade. For many of these large organizations, whether they be banking, financials, or banking, insurance, or capital markets, this means that they need to be thinking about how they bend the curve on innovation, how they think about new client experiences, how they think about attracting, retaining new clients, new products and services to meet the demands of younger generations who are going to be inheriting much of this generational wealth transfer transfer. This is going to create a massive paradigm shift in the way that these institutions now start to work hand in hand with creating that unique experience. And so we're starting to see the cross intersection of many industries. And so with respect to this specifically, many of these large firms are going after ultra high net worth clients. They're starting to look at the millionaire next door, and they're starting to think about the hand-in-hand collaboration between the luxury retail shopping experience within the retail commercial industry and what this means for them. We're also starting to see, the tokenization of assets. Many of the younger generation do not want to buy the same type of product solutions or portfolios that many of our parents or grandparents have had. And so now we're starting to see not only that, the rise for digital assets, tokenization, and stable coins across the industry. When we think about, the economy revolution and where things are going, we're also starting to see longevity 2.0 emerge as a critical change across the entire ecosystem. And this is one that is really starting to harness the power of the intersection of industries. We're starting to see life sciences, health sciences, and financial services come hand in hand as individuals are starting to live longer. That means their portfolios are living longer. With access to technology today, they can now use, new and emerging technologies for things like Grail tests for precancer screening or retina scan for, early stages of glaucoma. All of these things are going to have a longer term impact on the way they're thinking about financial stability and security for the long run. This is going to have an impact on insurers at scale as they start to think about the future of long-term care. It's going to have impact on hospitals and the entire ecosystem. And so as we think about the impact of longevity 2.0, specifically in the US economy, you have 10,000 people a day who are turning 65. Think about that. Let that sit with you for a moment. 10,000 people turning 65. What does that mean to our ecosystem? What does that mean to the future of work? What does that mean to many of the skilling programs that we have within our own organizations today that are going to be offset by a gap of talent and our workforce leaving and changing? We talked a little bit about the rise of digital assets. This is becoming even more relevant. And in the US earlier this year, passing the Genius Act that'll provide stability and security around this ecosystem. But many of us, and probably many of you on this call today, your organizations are starting to think about what digital assets tokenizations means to your organization, how you keep your organization safe, and how we think about this from a broader industry perspective. AI has also gone from being experiential to essential. If we rewind the clock 24 months ago, with the evolution of OpenAI and even Microsoft announcing many of our new co-pilots years ago, it feels like it was yesterday. We've now seen people adapt and embrace AI into their daily workloads and into their daily activity. And so as you think about this, this is no longer experience for most organizations or an experiment. This is really becoming a gravitational pull for how they start to think about the evolution of their organization. And as we start to think about this, cultural authenticity is going to be at an all-time high. As organizations start to adapt and approach an agentic workflow and an agentic model, human culture will become even more critical in the fabric to our organizations, and customer-centric innovation is going to change. How we engaged with many of these organizations and with our clients and across an ecosystem is very different than how we will engage as we think about going forward. And I think the big thing to think about this as we think about industry grounded in impact, but it's the interoperability across the financial services ecosystem in an AI regulated era that is really going to drive a fundamental change for us as we move forward. And that leads me into the next one. When we think about opportunities for financial stability, there are both positives and negatives, operational aspects and vulnerabilities. When we think about some of the vulnerabilities, many of you may be facing this today, but you have you have reliance on fewer partners. There are common data models that are spreading not only across your organization, but across the industry. We're looking at an exploitation of cyber attacks and risks to our own organizations. I look back last year when we had the larger CrowdStrike issue happen globally. Many people viewed that was a cyber attack and the way that it was impacting and infiltrating the entire ecosystem. But as we go forward, we're going to be needing to think about how we look at explainability, alignment, and challenges. And we're going to need to be thinking about concentration risk for many of these own organizations. As we think about the positive aspects to this, many of us have an opportunity now to be working hand in hand, to be thinking about regulatory compliance and how we're shaping the future. We're thinking about personalized financial products and hyper personalization at scale and what this means, and being able to leverage a lot of the data that we have had locked in our systems for decades, and now really being able to bring this to the forefront. And so when we think about the implications across our ecosystem, it's both a balance and a trade-off as we think about the evolution of AI. As we think about the kind of balance from an ecosystem perspective, the next thing that we're really starting to see emerge is evolving regulation and scrutiny. And so depending on which jurisdiction you are within the globe, there can be critical implications. And so when we think about, critical infrastructure and some of the work that we have seen over the course of the last 18 months specifically, DORA has really taken front center stage, especially in the European markets, but many of our US markets also cross borders and work hand in hand in the UK and in Europe. And so we're seeing some of these cross-pollination issues across the globe. We've got, different cyber issues that are starting to build up. We've got different AI regulatory impacts. We've got, commitment to sovereign cloud and different things happening across the globe. And so as we start to think about regulation and scrutiny, it's not just the guardrails within our own organization and keeping our own organization safe. We have to think about the spread of data and the spread of agents and how they're starting to work together, and really starting to adopt these frameworks, not only as individual organizations, but across our ecosystem to keep our clients, investors, and citizens of our community safe. And that really takes me into kind of the heart of some of the conversation today, and where we are seeing AI is disrupting business at its core. This is not just in financial services. This is happening in every facet of every industry that we see. And so as we think about this means that if we look back over the course of the last 50 years, the next 50 years is going to be nothing like what we have seen. And so, analytics and collaborative work streams of the past have changed from mainframe terminals to think about the move to SaaS, to think about graphical UI, and now, in the impetus of AI. And so organizations have really started to change the way they work. That doesn't even mean to say that we still don't have a lot of clients and financial services partners who still have mainframe applications. And so many of them are starting to think about this through the lens of what do they need to do today to move that data into cloud and or into other systems to kind of unlock the access that they have and how they're going to be thinking about the future of their business. And so when we think about the shift, what we have been able to see, and AI is dramatically accelerating business value. When we look at this slide, and I think one of the critical things here, when you look at the annual time, and this is specific to startups, and many people ask, why do we actually talk about startups in our business? But startups are actually having a significant impact on unlocking AI for many of these large institutions, regardless of industry. And so when you think about the number of startups in the US specifically, there's been over 104,000 AI patents in the US in the last 3 years, and over 3,200 AI startups in the last 18 months. And what that means is this serves as a catalyst for many of these large organizations to not only have to think about, build first or buy later, or buy first, build later. Many of them can do this hand in hand. And so a lot of these, AI startups and fintech companies are really starting to emerge in organizations. And so where in the past, SaaS-based solutions, it took 65 months to see value. Now we're actually seeing AI value in a very short time over the course of the next 5 months. And so what this is doing, it's contributing to significant economic growth for the sector and becoming a catalyst for the overall economy, which leads me into the next slide. As we think about this catalyst, and I think this is extremely relevant, and there's tons of studies that are coming out, but what we have heard recently from IDC, and I think that this is actually, somewhat conservative, but they project that there's going to be 1.3 billion agents within the industry by 2028. Think about that. We haven't had the impact of that many new jobs or opportunities surface, especially in the US or across the globe over the course of the last little while. And so as we start to think about the impact that agents can play on our ecosystem, not just as humans, but as solving many of the business process problems and challenges that we face today, this is going to be a rise. And so I think of many of the large organizations that are really pushing the boundaries with regards to AI today. We have BNY, which is an industry leader. There was an article in the New York Times in July that talked about them having an agent for every single employee. And now they're looking at a multiple agent strategy. And so what that means to them is how they think about managing and promoting some of these employees, giving them email addresses and so on and so forth. And so as we start to think about the evolution of AI and the agentic workforce, many organizations are starting to think that their organization will not only double, triple, and or quadruple when they start to think about the impact of agents on their organization within our ecosystem. Why this matters specifically for you, for the US market and our financial services organizations that are on this call today. When we think about the overall employment engine and what this means to GDP, 7.4% of GDP can be changed, altered, and driven by the impact of AI and agents. And this represents 6.5 million jobs in the US specifically. Think about that. We haven't had an opportunity to drive in any form of technology shift or economic shift, the opportunity to drive this much GDP in one single moment. When we think about the opportunity for capital markets specifically, there's been 57,200 rounds of funding in the last 12 months. That's more than any other country in the world. And so when we think about the fuel of where we are starting to place our bets as organizations in AI and really drive into the market, this will have a substantial and lasting impact. And then the 83 trillion, which we talked about. But what this looks at in total, when we think about the US market specifically, is the ability to really unlock opportunity within our market. And so one of the lines at the bottom of the slide, which I absolutely love, but the AI spend in financial services is projected to grow from 35 billion in 2024 to 97 billion in 2027. Let that kind of sit with you for a second. There is going to be an immense opportunity, and many organizations are looking at this saying, I don't really have that from an IT budget perspective, or I don't know where that spend is going to come from. As we think about the future, a lot of these decisions are not just going to be made by many of the IT providers or IT areas of our organizations and technology areas. They're going to come hand in hand from the business. There are going to be specific use cases that drive ROI that will enhance and unlock savings across the organization. AI will also start to power new revenue streams for many of your organizations, and we've already started to see that come to life for many of our clients across the globe. And so as we think about this and what this really means is as people start to embed and think about agents, this is based on our 2025 annual work trend index, and you can click to the link here. But this really starts to talk about the change that we are seeing. And so these numbers matter because they represent the massive shift that's underway in our business. 88% of the workforce is telling us that they don't have enough time or energy to get their job done. 82% of leaders felt confident that they invested in agents. This would lead to further productivity over the course of the next 18 months. And when we think about it, and this is a fascinating stat, but AI beats the human baseline. And so when we think about how people are showing up and our ability to drive productivity, 87.5% is a significant number. For the first time ever, AI is getting smarter. And in recent scoring on the ARC and AGI test, it's showing up better than the human baseline. And so as we think about the shift in the evolution of our business and being able to do more with less, or in some cases, less with more, this will definitely have a significant impact on the way we work. This leads us into part of why we're here today. We're entering a new era where AI can now reason, adapt, and solve problems in extraordinary ways. As leaders, the challenge ahead is clear. To prepare your organization for an AI-enhanced future, the shift is being driven by the rise of digital labor, which is giving way to new kinds of enterprise. And this is where we view the frontier firm as being born. Organizations look fundamentally different from those we know today, built around on-demand intelligence and powered by human AI collaboration. They scale faster, they operate with greater agility, and they unlock value at unprecedented speed. And so as we start to think about that, every company is on this journey to becoming a frontier firm. And so when we look back over time and over history, much of us focused on digital labor. Now we're starting to think about redesigning workflows and organizational structures within our organization. And we'll spend some time chatting about this a little bit further today. And we're really starting to look at adopting intelligence on tap. And that is how we're starting to think about being able to harness the power and unlock the data and knowledge that is trapped within our organizations and really harness the power to pull that forward. And so what we're starting to see, AI is this is all based on economic reality. Historically, productivity relied on human labor and ingenuity. And over time, that was augmented to machine labor. Think about the printing press, and even more recently, the shift to the laptop and the mobile phone. And so as we start to think about how we've worked in the past to how we work in the future, we're really going to be focusing on digital labor. And so as we think about this, we've talked a little bit about the printing press. The printing press at a time, was transformational to the way that information was disseminated across the globe. Fast forward, once knowledge started to cascade across the globe, people could take that intelligence and start to create new forms of ideas and new forms of business. This then translated into human labor, but we were really kind of trapped by how much we could do from a productivity perspective. Now, with the impetus of AI and agents, we have the ability to collaborate together to unlock this intelligence within our own organizations. But what this means for us is that this is going to change over time. And so the organizational structures that we've had in the past are going to cease to exist. And so once we start to think about this new reality, and so what you see on the top is really this traditional org chart. And so you think about the silos across your own organizations. You may even have repeatable organizations sitting inside some of these silos that are doing the same thing, but not working together. And so as we start to think about this new org structure, this new work chart, if you will, we think that this will move more to a Hollywood model where people start to swarm to the job that needs to be done. And so I think of even through the lens of Microsoft as client zero, we've really started to transform in our own environment and are really starting to move in this fashion. And we're seeing many organizations across multiple industries, and especially in financial services, shift to this way now that people have access to information in a much faster way, and they're trying to drive new opportunities within their organization. The second that we're starting to see is human first and agent first led organizations, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But this is really where humans are working hand in hand with agents on reinventing processes that can scale across their organization and into the ecosystem. And then as we think about an agentic marketplace, many of our organizations are not going to create every single agent. And many of our organizations are already working with external clients or partners for different types of services, incoming and outgoing. If I think about financial services specifically, large asset managers work with the likes of the London Stock Exchange or BlackRock or FactSet or MSCI or others for internal data consumption. As we think about going forward, this agentic marketplace will offer many of these agents that we need to do our business today. And so many of us will go into this agent marketplace, subscribe to these agents, pull them into our environment, and they will become part of our workforce, working hand in hand to get the jobs done as we start to think about this. And so once we've started to adapt, this will really make intelligence on tap much easier to access. And so we can start to think about this as a low cost option as we start to move forward. But it begs the question, at the end of the day, how do each of us on this call really need to be thinking about how we structure our organization as we move forward? And so when we think about the way that work is changing, we believe in human-centered AI. We believe in humans and agents at the center. And this is a vision for how our organizations that we're working with today can really become AI first. And so what we're starting to see here is we've got a lot of organizations who are gravitating towards level one. If I look at the evolution over the course of the last 24 months, many people were grappling with the idea of AI. How do I make it real? What's the proof of concept that I need to move forward with? How do I think about the guardrails within my own organization around transparency and ethics and keeping the organization safe through and secure? And so many organizations were starting to adapt chat or they were starting to adapt tools like Copilot, whether it be Microsoft or a third party. And so what we've started to see now is that as we move into this frontier firm, organizations who are looking at level one, you have humans working with agents or assisting agents. As we think about level two, organization or individuals are starting to work leading teams of agents. And so that's where we start to get into a bit of an agent boss mentality. And so for many of us, where we've managed humans throughout our lifetime, managing agents is a new muscle. Understanding when to promote, retire, think differently about where they sit within our overall environment or ecosystem, how to manage them through, typical HR channels, and how we're thinking about, when we think through the lens of our performance reviews. How do you do a performance review on an agent? How do you know it's working well? How do you know when it's not working well and you need to kind of pull it out of the ecosystem? And then lastly, agent-led teams. And so when we think about this is agents powering agents to make a lot of these decisions as they move forward, overseen by a human, but thinking about how they're running entire teams and organizations. And so when you kind of step back and think about this, many of our organizations are kind of sitting between level one and level two. We are seeing some frontier firms really pushing level three. And so every organization is at a bit of a different juncture. But what I would say to any of you who are on the call today, if you haven't started to dabble with AI or haven't started to think about the future of your organization and how you can start to unlock or untap new opportunities, new revenue streams, or new lines of business to think about working in this fashion, it's something that you should be doing, because many people think that this is future driven. But it is here, it's now, and it's real. And we're actually seeing this live in many large organizations globally. Having said all of this, as we start to think about the move towards agentic workflow within our own organization, the way that we think about skilling today will be very different than how we think about it tomorrow. And so this is how we're thinking about the new skills ladder. And I had a fascinating conversation this morning with someone out of Columbia University, where they're looking at the psychology of this and saying, many people are struggling today to say, my work and my job will change. What do I need to be thinking about doing? How do I need to be doing this differently? And so when we think about it, this is really around, what do you need to do, prefer to do, and choose to do? And so being able to create agents and an agentic process to take away some of the mundane tasks so that you are able to now focus on the creativity and driving the business forward. And so, what you need to do, agent boss and agent hiring, all the way up to what we choose to do. This allows you to have more of a judgment on some of the high stake decisions and societal accountability that you need to be thinking about as we start to pivot our firms towards the frontier firm. What it takes to become a frontier firm. And so we've talked a little bit about the structure of how it's going, but where it's going and how we think about it differently will really be the future. And so as we think about people, process, and culture, this is key and sits within every single one of our organizations today, but will take more of a center stage as we think about the move to the frontier firm. And so as we think about people, this is going to become a new skill set that's required as we think about being able to hire agents and understanding the capability of what can be done to span an agent workflow within our organization, being able to assign that work and think differently about the way that we're interacting, not only as an organization, but to quantify the ROI as a result of that. And are you able to expand your headcount around areas that you need to focus on, or limit your headcount and really think through things? And so people is going to be a core foundation to what we're seeing. Process, obviously, as we think about this, and we've seen over the evolution of time, process is going to be a huge component to this, but understanding the guardrails and how we're starting to think about redesigning these workflows is going to be a critical component. And then culture, upskilling your agent, making sure that you've got different KPIs for how you're looking at this. I'll share a little bit about Microsoft. And many of you know, Satya has been in role for over a decade now. And when he started, he put in a program around the growth mindset and how we think about working collectively as an organization around model coach and care and being a customer obsessed organization. As we have moved through the era of AI, Microsoft is even starting to transform. And so now we're starting to look at what it takes to be a frontier firm through our own lens. And we're starting to think about how our KPIs and our performance management align to the expectations of being a frontier firm and how our employees are now starting to use AI in their day-to-day workloads. And so what this means, excuse me, is this is a broad transformation, not just enterprise-wide, but this is transforming every single facet of our business, every process, every division. And so when I think about this specifically, it isn't just rooted in the HR change across our organization. Many of the programs in our HR practice will come and change as the result of AI, but this is going to become an enterprise-wide opportunity for all of us to think about how we change and transform. When we think about the value, and this really kind of cascades from the last people, culture, and process, but as we start to think about what it means to be a frontier firm and many of our organizations, these are really kind of the 5 key attributes that we see when moving towards a frontier firm. What is your overall business strategy kind of from start to finish? Have you infused AI into that as you think about reconstructing any of our large financial institutions? So whether that be banking, capital markets, or insurance, we're starting to think of how organizations have created a centralized process for agentic workflow to make a lot of these decisions when they're starting to think about AI governance. And they have now brought together kind of an innovation and AI innovation committee across kind of that sits underneath their executive suite to help start to think about what it means to be a frontier firm. Technology strategy, I would say, is in most cases at the core, and obviously a lot of the area that we work with our partners, but business is really taking the forefront. And so in many of these cases, technology is not making these decisions in a silo. And so they're looking at it through the lens of, data security, agentic software development. Do they have the right foundations in place? Or do you have access to the right LLMs? Are you looking at buying or building a tool? Are you looking at leveraging and harnessing the entire AI and fintech ecosystem? And do you have a responsible AI strategy? This has really probably been one of the most elevated discussions that we've seen in market over the course of the last little while. When you think about the applied experience and citizen development and how you are starting to monitor this to track ROI, every organization is different. And so making sure that you have an understanding of how you want to scale this. Is this a hub and spoke model? Is this a governed model? And as you really start to think about this, and then organizational culture has probably been one of the biggest drivers, making sure that you're communicating from the top why you're changing. We've seen many organizations come out of the gate and create fear, uncertainty, and doubt for many of their employees over the course of the last 2 years. As they have started to adopt AI, many people felt that their jobs were at risk. That's not always the case. If you communicate as to why you're transforming to drive productivity and give back to some of these employees so that they can be more productive, but also find more joy in the job that they're doing, it's really helped. And so I go back to the BNY example or Barclays or others that we have seen across the globe. ETIU is another one that comes to name. We've really started to see this organization and culture shift as they've started to go through this process. And then AI governance is really what underpins all of our organizations as we start to think about this differently. And so as we think about where we're starting to see some of the functional changes across industry, this just really looks at some of the individual areas across our organization and becomes a gateway to agents transforming every function and industry and redefining any process. And so as we think about customer service, we've had some significant areas where we have had underwriting and hyper-personalization at scale for product in different use cases. I think about some large financial institutions have actually gone so far as to provide agents to every single one of their customers in an advisory capacity. And so Vanguard is really starting to push the needle in that space. You've got others like Morgan Stanley and other large wealth managers that are really going after the high net worth, ultra high net worth spaces we talked about in the beginning, and really starting to think about how they can serve some of these global multinational customers that they work with today from an investment portfolio perspective. And so thinking about that customer experience and what this means not only for today, but going forward as well. On the flip side, we've seen marketing really erupt from hyper personalization at scale and content creation and demand generation, and being able to really target new clients for many of these large financial institutions. Now, on the flip side of that, HR, we've talked a little bit about, has been completely reinvented. But as we start to think about legal, being able to use AI and agents to think about, the consolidation of records and access to knowledge and regulatory and compliant management. AI is really starting to infuse itself into every line of the business that we are seeing across the globe. And so as I think about, some of the predominant use cases, we're seeing huge eruption in the payments space. And we've had quite a few announcements over the course of the last 2 weeks with regards to what we're seeing there. And so I won't share on here, but you can check in the market. And so I think it's been fascinating to see that the likes of the payment ecosystem, which historically has been very regimented, many of these large financial organizations are now starting to think about the agentic experience and what this means for them and how they work across the ecosystem and multiple agents interacting with one another through this workflow. And so we've seen this happen, with the likes of Starbucks. We've seen it happen with Booking.com. We're starting to see this with some of the other large payment providers and card providers across the ecosystem. But what this also means is that on the back end of that, we're working hand in hand with them on thinking through things like the impact of fraud and cybercrime and anti-money laundering that goes with a lot of these things, and how the agentic workflow can really work to kind of think through these things. And so my suggestion is always start with the end in mind as to how you're thinking about where you want to go, and reinventing a process that way versus starting with the process you have, and think about it through the ecosystem. Are you doing this, or is there a bigger opportunity to partner or collaborate? Where we've seen the ability to transform the market really comes from, Microsoft plus partner plus client, or multiple clients in tandem, as we think about really the industry shift that we have ahead of us. And so as we think about, some of the use cases, I wanted to leave this with you today. But where we've been able to see some of the biggest transformation is within these 3 clients, but many others as well. And so we've had, Thomson Reuters. Due diligence is complex. They've created a due diligence agent that the result has been they've been able to cut several tasks within their workflow by over 50%. And what this has done is it's dramatically starting to increase the opportunity that they have to get in front of clients to do more and spend time in those high touch automated services, or outside of the automated services that they need. When we think about Barclays, we had a very large announcement with them in late June, early July of this year, where they are moving to 100% transforming employee experience through an AI and agentic workflow. And so they have really kind of broken down the confines of their own organization and are thinking about what this means. UBS is another substantial and large organization that is doing the same. And so as we start to think about what this means for our organization and for our industry, I keep this at the forefront. There is so much that we can be doing together to reimagine industry powered by purpose to solve some of the biggest paradigm shifts that our firms are facing. We just need to be thinking differently about the technology that can underpin and support that. And that is all I have for today.